The day of the HOA election arrived with a mixture of tension and anticipation hanging over. Willow Creek residents gathered at the community center, some chatting nervously, others sitting quietly clutching their ballots. Jordan arrived early along with Lisa Malik and several other neighbors who had stood with him throughout the ordeal. The room was filled with familiar faces, some smiling, others still wary, but all united by a common goal to reclaim their neighborhood from the grip of fear and intimidation. Karen showed up, to her expression a mask of confidence, but beneath the surface there was a flicker of anxiety. She circulated through the crowd, handing out flyers, her voice raised just enough to be heard above the murmurs, warning that the changes proposed by Jordan and his group would ruin the neighborhood that the current board was experienced, and that outsiders like Jordan did not understand the community spirit she was trying to rally support, but the enthusiasm for her message felt forced, and many ignored her. When the time came to vote, the tension was palpable. Every hand raised and every ballot cast seemed to carry the weight of years of frustration and hope. The HOA president, who had once turned a blind eye to Karen's antics, nervously announced the results after what felt like an eternity. The vote was overwhelmingly in favor of removing Karen from the board and replacing several members who had supported her behavior. There was a round of applause and many smiles as the community celebrated a hard-won victory. Karen, however, refused to accept the results gracefully. She stormed out of the meeting, declaring that she would appeal the decision, that she was fighting for the true values of the neighborhood and warning of legal action. She posted angry rants on social media, accusing Jordan of harassment and bullying, painting herself as the victim in a war she had started and lost. But the community had moved on. Many joined Jordan in publicly supporting the new board and the promise of transparency and fairness. In the weeks that followed, the HOA implemented new policies, including a clear and transparent complaint process, a community mediation program, and regular open forums for residents to voice concerns. The atmosphere in Willow Creek began to change. Residents felt safer and more respected. The days of secret complaints and arbitrary fines were slowly becoming a thing of the past, and Jordan was seen as a leader who had helped bring that change. Karen, meanwhile, retreated from public view, but the damage was done. Her reputation was tarnished and her influence all but erased. She found it increasingly difficult to get support even from old allies, and rumors started to circulate about financial troubles and possible legal challenges related to her actions within the HOA. Jordan heard the whispers, but he focused on the future. His home was finally a place of peace, and the community was stronger for it. With Karen removed from the HOA board, the neighborhood of Willow Creek began to heal, but the aftermath of her reign lingered like a shadow. Some residents still found it hard to trust the system after years of fear and manipulation. Jordan understood this and worked closely with the new board to create outreach programs designed to rebuild trust and foster a true sense of community. He helped organize neighborhood block parties, monthly meetups, and even a community newsletter to keep everyone informed and connected. Slowly, the wounds began to close. Karen, on the other hand, found herself increasingly isolated. Her once formidable presence in the neighborhood reduced to whispered rumors and distant stares. She tried to maintain her property meticulously, perhaps as a way to hold on to some shred of dignity, but the strain was visible. She made few appearances at community events, and when she did, her cold glare was met with polite but firm indifference. It was clear she no longer held the power she once wielded. Dead. However, the story was far from over, because a few weeks after the board election, Jordan received an unexpected call from a real estate agent informing him that Karen's house was on the market at a surprisingly low price. Curiosity and concern mixed inside him. He wondered if the mounting pressure from the community had finally forced her to sell, or if there was something else going on behind closed doors. Word spread among the neighbors. Some expressed relief, others speculated about the reasons for the sale. Some whispered about financial troubles, possibly legal fees from HOA disputes, and others thought it might be a sign Karen was finally ready to leave the past behind. Whatever the reason, the sale marked an important turning point the end of an era in Willow Creek. Jordan found himself conflicted. He had wanted peace, not revenge. He hoped whoever bought the house would bring kindness and community spirit to the street. He even considered reaching out to the new owners to welcome them and offer support. The idea of a fresh start for the house symbolized hope for the entire neighborhood, a chance to rewrite the story that Karen had written with fear and control men while Karen packed up the home she had lived in for over a decade, moving boxes, stacking furniture, and sorting through memories, both good and bad. The process was bittersweet. She was losing her home, but also losing the role she had made central to her identity. The walls that had once echoed her commands and complaints now felt empty and unfamiliar. The chapter was closing, though the scars she left behind would take longer to heal. Jordan watched from a distance, knowing that this was the natural conclusion of a difficult chapter, but also the beginning of a new one. He remained hopeful that Willow Creek would thrive and that the lessons learned would prevent a repeat of the past. Community was fragile, but with care and attention, it could grow stronger and more resilient than ever before. The responses Jordan received from the flyers lit a spark inside him that he had not felt in a long time. He realized that his battle with Karen was not just personal, it was part of a larger problem that had gone unchecked for too long. The neighbors who reached out to him were cautious at first. Some asked him not to share their names. Some wanted to meet in person away from their homes as if they were afraid of being watched. One woman named Lisa had lived in Willow Creek for almost 7 years and said she had paid over $400 in bogus HOA fines, all of which could be traced back to Karen and her self-appointed authority. Another neighbor, an older man named Carl, revealed that Karen had once reported him for harboring dangerous wildlife after he built a small koi pond in his backyard, complete with decorative fish and a tiny waterfall. The accusation was laughable, but the complaint forced Carl to drain the pond and remove the entire setup at his own expense. Jordan listened to story after story and realized Karen had been using fear, manipulation, and false rules to control the entire community, and until now no one had been willing to push back. With this new information, Jordan decided to organize a private meeting at his house, just a small gathering of the neighbors who had contacted him. It would be a chance to share more stories, compare notes, and decide what to do next. When the night arrived, 9 people showed up and they filled his living room with nervous energy, but also a sense of relief. Everyone had a story. Everyone had a moment where Karen made them feel small, powerless, or harassed. Some had moved their trash bins behind bushes. Some had stopped putting up decorations. Some even avoided parking in front of their own homes just to avoid her wrath. As they talked, they started to realize something important. Most of the complaints filed by Karen were not official HOA policies. They were made-up rules that she claimed existed, but no one ever verified. Jordan pulled out his printed copy of the HOA bylaws and everyone took turns flipping through it. They found nothing about weekend move-ins, nothing about porch lights, nothing about fish ponds or wreaths or dog breeds. Karen had been inventing her own rule book, and the HOA board had either been complicit or too lazy to challenge her. Lisa suggested they form a committee of their own, not just a group of angry neighbors, but an organized coalition that could attend HOA meetings together, review board activity, and demand transparency. They would gather proof, collect signatures, and, if necessary, file formal complaints against Karen and any board members who supported her abuse of power. Jordan agreed and offered to take the lead since he already had the records, videos, photos, and notes to back everything up. Before the night ended, they created a shared document to log incidents and began drafting a petition to present to the HOA board. It was the first time many of them had felt hopeful in years. The tide was shifting, the silence was breaking, and for the first time Karen was no longer the uncaring. Could feel something changing in the neighborhood, and she did not like it. The glances from her neighbors were different now, colder, less fearful. The tight grip she once held over the community was starting to loosen, and she knew exactly why. Jordan was behind it. She had underestimated him, thought he would be like the others, quiet, compliant, easy to intimidate, but he had turned out to be the opposite, and now she was starting to lose control. She watched from her window every day, counting the cars parked outside his house, monitoring who came and who left, her notebook filling up with names and times and observations that she would later report as suspicious activity. Next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, and Jordan, along with his newly formed group, planned to attend together. It would be the first time Karen would be confronted in a public setting where she could not manipulate the narrative or hide behind anonymous complaints. In the days leading up to the meeting, Jordan and Lisa gathered signatures from more residents and finalized their petition. The document included over 20 reported incidents of harassment, fabricated fines, and abuse of power, all tied directly to Karen's actions and negligence by complicit board member Karen. Sensing the threat escalated her efforts, she sent out an email blast to the HOA mailing list warning residents about rising crime and urging them to report any unusual behavior in the neighborhood. She framed the message as a concerned citizen doing her duty, but the wording was filled with veiled references to Jordan and his allies, suggesting they were outsiders trying to dismantle the values of the community. Jordan read the email with disbelief, but also with determination. He knew she was panicking and desperate to regain her position of power. The night of the meeting arrived, and the usually empty HOA hall was packed. Residents filled every seat, and a few stood along the back wall. Jordan and his group sat together near the front, holding printed copies of their petition and documentation. Karen sat on the board panel, her arms crossed, her expression tight. As the meeting began, Jordan waited patiently as the standard agenda items were addressed, but when the floor opened for resident concerns, he stood and calmly introduced himself, spoke clearly, respectfully, but firmly, outlining the pattern of targeted harassment, the false rule enforcement, and the lack of accountability that had affected not just him but many others in the room. One by one, other residents stood and shared their stories, voices shaking with nerves but empowered by solidarity. Karen interrupted several times, trying to dismiss the accusations, calling them exaggerations or misunderstandings, but the evidence was undeniable and the room was no longer on her city. As Jordan submitted the petition to the board, the room erupted in quiet murmurs of support. Even a few board members seemed visibly uncomfortable with the spotlight now shining on their own inaction. The meeting ended with a promise from the board to launch a formal investigation into the allegations and review Karen's role within the HOA. Jordan left that night not with a sense of victory, but with a sense of progress. The battle was far from over, but the tide had clearly turned. Voice echoing through the neighborhood. In the days following the HOA meeting, the atmosphere in Willow Creek shifted in ways both subtle and obvious. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now waved to Jordan when he walked his dog or watered his plants. More people stopped to chat in their driveways, and the hushed anxiety that used to hang in the air like smoke seemed to lift slightly. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to the people living in it, not to one woman with a clipboard and a power complex. Karen, however, was far from defeated. She doubled down on her routines, walking her dog 5 times a day, planting herself in front of her window with binoculars, filing new complaints with increased urgency and aggression. She seemed to believe that if she just tried hard enough, she could smother the resistance rising against her. But every complaint she filed was now met with skepticism by the HOA board, and some were outright dismissed without review. A sharp contrast from how things used to be when her word was enough to fine or frighten someone into compliance. Jordan kept building his case. He now had support from nearly 24 residents, and together they compiled every piece of evidence they had into a single document, dozens of photos, recordings, emails, and timestamps proving a long and consistent pattern of harassment. They were not just trying to push Karen out of the HOA, they were now demanding a full recall of the board members who had enabled her behavior and looked the other way for years. Lisa took charge of organizing the signatures for the recall, while Malik designed flyers encouraging residents to attend the upcoming vote. Karen responded with a smear campaign, she printed her own flyers warning that Jordan was trying to destroy the fabric of the community, that he was turning neighbors against each other and inviting chaos into their peaceful lives. She taped them to mailboxes, slid them under doors, and even went as far as to post one on Jordan's garage door in the middle of the night, but his security cameras caught the act in clear detail, and he sent the footage to the HOA board the next morning. The board issued Karen a formal warning for trespassing and harassment, her second in less than a month, and word of it spread quickly through the neighborhood. Many who had once feared her began to speak openly about their own experiences. One elderly couple said Karen had told them their Halloween decorations were satanic and threatened to report them for disturbing the peace. Another neighbor admitted she had paid 3 separate fines for the same so-called violation because she was too afraid to question the charge. As the upcoming vote would decide whether Karen would be officially removed from the HOA board and whether a new set of representatives would be elected to restore fairness and transparency. Jordan knew the odds were now in their favor, but he also knew Karen would not go quietly. She had built her kingdom on control and fear, and now that foundation was cracking under the weight of truth and community unity. It was a warm Saturday morning when Jordan pulled his U-Haul into the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, a place he had dreamed of living for years. The streets were clean, the lawns were pristine, and the houses looked like they came out of a catalog. It was everything he had worked for and more. After saving for years and finally landing the promotion he had been chasing, Jordan bought a modest but beautiful 3-bedroom house near the cul-de-sac. It was his fresh start, a new chapter. Away from the noise of the city and the chaos of apartment living, he began unloading boxes with the help of his cousin Malik. Everything seemed peaceful. A few neighbors waved as they passed by. A couple of kids rode their bikes, and a golden retriever barked excitedly from behind a fence. But then she appeared, her walk sharp and purposeful, her eyes squinting as though she were trying to spot a crime scene instead of a move. And her name was Deborah, but everyone around the neighborhood simply called her Karen. She was the self-appointed enforcer of the homeowners association, and she carried that imaginary badge with pride. Karen marched straight across the lawn, her heels clicking against the sidewalk, and without a greeting or even a hello, she pointed at the U-Haul and demanded to know what Jordan was doing here. Her tone was accusatory, like she had caught him trespassing, not moving into his own house. Jordan wiped the sweat from his brow and calmly told her that he had just closed on the house last week, and today was his official move-in day. He even offered to show her the paperwork, but she waved him off and insisted that she had not been notified and therefore he must be lying. Malik laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Karen was dead serious. She crossed her arms and told Jordan that moving trucks were not allowed on weekends, that there were rules about noise and street blockage, and that he was in clear violation of HOA policy. Jordan, who had spent months reading the community guidelines, knew for a fact that there was no such rule and that she was making things up on the spot. But before he could respond, she pulled out her phone and said she was calling the police. Jordan stood in stunned silence as Karen dialed 911 and reported a suspicious vehicle and loud activity at her neighbor's house, claiming she feared for her safety and believed someone was illegally occupying the home. Malik tried to step in and de-escalate, but Karen turned her back and spoke louder into the phone, emphasizing her words as if she were reading from a drama script. Jordan could feel the eyes of nearby neighbors starting to linger, some stepping onto their porches, some peeking through blinds, confused about what was happening on an otherwise peaceful Saturday morning. Within 10 minutes, two patrol cars rolled up, lights flashing. The officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts, but not yet drawn. They approached Jordan, who calmly explained the situation, pulled out his ID's closing papers, and even the house key still dangling on a new keychain. The officers looked over everything, nodded, and apologized, explaining that they had to respond to every call, but it was clear there was no threat, no crime, and no reason for them to be there. Karen stood nearby, fuming as if the police had betrayed her by not arresting Jordan on the spot. As the officers left with a quiet warning for Karen about filing false reports, Jordan looked at her and said nothing, just smiled politely and went back to his boxes, but in his mind a seed had been planted. This was not going to be the peaceful life he imagined, not with Karen next door and her watchful eyes glaring from across the hedge. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. The next few days passed slowly for Jordan as he tried to settle into his new home. The boxes were slowly disappearing, the furniture was coming together, and he had even met a few neighbors who welcomed him with cautious smiles and side glances. It became obvious to him that while the neighborhood was beautiful, it came with an invisible tension, a tension that seemed to ripple outward from one house in particular, Karen's house, the one with the perfect rose bushes and the sign that read Neighborhood Watch Captain in bold red letters taped to her window. Every morning Jordan would see her standing at her window, coffee cup in hand, her eyes locked onto his driveway as if waiting for a reason to spring into action again. He tried to ignore it. He reminded himself that this was temporary, that once she saw he was just a quiet neighbor who kept to himself, things would calm down. But it only got worse. The following Thursday, Jordan came home from work to find a bright orange notice taped to his garage door. It was from the HOA citing him for improper garbage bin placement, an offense he did not commit since his bins were neatly stored behind the gate just like the guidelines said. Took a picture of the bins, then went inside and called the HOA number listed on the letter. A woman named Marissa answered and seemed confused when Jordan explained the situation. She told him no official complaint had been filed yet and the letter might have come from a board member acting independently. When he asked who that might be, Marissa hesitated and then muttered something about a long history of issues with a certain resident. Jordan did not need her to say the name, he already knew. Next morning another notice appeared, this time complaining about weeds in his yard, which made him laugh because he had spent 3 hours mowing and trimming everything just the day before. Malik came by later that evening and Jordan showed him the notices. Malik shook his head and said, "Man, this lady has way too much time on her hands." But Jordan was beginning to understand that it wasn't about the bins or the weeds or the imaginary rules. It was about control. Karen needed to feel powerful, and she had made him her target. Later that night, Jordan stood at his window and watched as Karen walked down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, stopping at various houses and scribbling notes. It was like she was conducting her own patrol, checking for minor infractions, hoping to catch someone out of line so she could feel like she mattered. He saw her glance at his house, then pause in front of it for several long seconds, scribbling something again before moving on. He shook his head, wondering what kind of person lived like that. Following weekend, Jordan received his first HOA fine in the mail, $65 for a so-called noise violation tied to his move-in day. Despite no one else having reported it, he knew who had filed the complaint, and he also knew it would not stop here. But what Karen did not know was that Jordan had already begun keeping records, taking photos, saving voicemails, and logging every strange interaction. He had a feeling this was going to escalate, and he was not about to let her win without a fight. Jordan was not the type to start trouble. He had always believed in minding his own business and staying out of drama, but the longer he lived in Willow Creek, the more he realized that Karen was not going to let things go. Her obsession with rules and authority was not just annoying, it was invasive and slowly turning his dream home into a daily stress zone. Every morning he would find something new, a note taped to his door, a plastic HOA bag hanging from his mailbox, or an anonymous email warning him of minor infractions that seemed too specific to be coincidence. One morning he woke to find his backyard gate slightly ajar, which was strange because he always locked it after taking out the trash. Nothing was stolen and nothing seemed out of place, but it left him unsettled. He checked his outdoor camera and saw grainy footage of someone walking near his fence around 3 a.m., but the figure was too far to identify. That was the moment Jordan knew he needed to do more than just document what was happening. He needed to protect himself. He installed a new security system, added floodlights, and even bought a second set of cameras to cover every angle of his home. And while Karen continued her campaign. One of her favorite tactics was walking her tiny white dog past Jordan's house 3 or 4 times a day, each time pausing for a little too long, pretending to pick up after the dog while actually scanning his yard. His porch, his blinds, even peering into his garage. If the door was open, Jordan started keeping notes of every time she passed by and began noticing a pattern her walks coincided with when his car was in the driveway, as if she was waiting to catch him doing something wrong. It reached a new level when Jordan received a notice that he was in violation of holiday decoration rules for putting up string lights on his porch, even though it was only fall and the lights were warm white, not even blinking, just ambient glow for the cool evenings. He tried contacting the HOA again, but this time he was met with a cold tone. The woman on the phone told him the complaint had come from a board member and that unless he wanted to escalate it further, he should comply. Jordan could tell something had changed. The tone was different, more hostile and less helpful. Malik visited that weekend, and after hearing everything, he told Jordan it was time to go public, not just with the HOA, but with the neighbors. Jordan was hesitant. He did not want to be labeled as the new guy causing trouble, but Malik reminded him that silence only helps people like Karen, and that chances were other neighbors were tired of her antics too inspired by that Jordan created a small flyer summarizing his experiences and added his contact information. He left copies in the mailboxes of nearby homes, asking if anyone else had faced similar issues, and to his surprise, he received 8 responses within today's each message. Shared a variation of the same story: random finds, bogus complaints, unannounced inspections, late-night dog walks, and constant surveillance. It became clear that Karen had been terrorizing the neighbor.